Welcome to the Behind the Girl Boss podcast, where every woman's journey takes center stage. Join us in this safe space as we explore the ins and outs of business, career, mental health, the music industry, and more. Whether you're a go-getter or a dream chaser, we've got stories for you. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok for an exclusive backstage pass. Get ready to be inspired, empowered, and entertained. Welcome to the ride. Hey everyone, what's up and welcome back to the podcast. So we have another guest with us and we have Alex. So hi, Alex.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks so much for coming on. Do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur and I love to build businesses that have meaning and also profit. I think we're really conditioned in this world to think like if you want to be a helper, you have to not make any money or just like give all of your labor away, especially people conditioned as women in this world. And so I start businesses that have a lot of love and a lot of values centered in them. I think I saw you post this on Instagram and you loved it. But my mission personally is to redirect the flow of capital from those who do harm with it to those who heal with it. And so that's everything that I do, including being on this podcast, is all about that.
Yes, I love that. I'm excited to dive into all that with you. But before we do that, I like to do a little hot seat segment to kind of just break the ice and a little fun facts. So the first one is if you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Michael J. Fox. And the reason is not Back to the Future, even though that would be enough. It's like 80s video gold. I don't know
Yes.
if you've seen it.
Yes, I have.
But he has Parkinson's, and I don't know if you know that
My
part of his
dad actually
story.
has Parkinson's, so I do.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that, but then you definitely know who Michael J. Fox is.
Yes.
I don't know if we'll get into this, but when I was in my mid 20s, I had just this very sudden, very random onset of brain disease, which is still not diagnosed. I'm really stable and good, but
Mhm.
nobody, the best neurologist in the world, couldn't figure out what happens to me. And I was lucky enough to come across his book, Michael J. Fox's, well, he has a lot of books, but that book, the first one, is Lucky Man. And it changed my whole life. I read it when I was like 24, and I think it has informed almost everything that I've done since. So I'm
Yeah.
so grateful to him, and he's been writing since, and all his books are great. But I would just love to sit with him and thank him.
Yeah, and I feel like he has so much to offer and say and like share with his like whole story. I think it would just be like a really intelligent conversation, honestly.
I'm so excited that you understood why I said that from the beginning. That never happens. People are always like, "Are you a real Back to the Future fan or Family Ties or something?" I'm like, "No, it's bigger than that."
Yeah, and
Well,
I've
yes, but no.
all his speeches too, like I've watched and stuff. He's just like has so much like good things to say. And yeah, obviously he's a good actor as well, but I feel like he just has such a story that like sometimes people just don't listen to.
Yeah, and he was actually also an alcoholic, so he has this
Mm-hmm.
really interesting intersection. I love how he talks about acceptance and
Mm-hmm.
like you can't necessarily control what's going on, but there's always a way through it. And
Yeah.
so it's not just like I accept it and then all this bad stuff happens. It's like, well, this is reality, so how are we moving through it? And I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing. He says it much more eloquently, but I just find that so useful.
No, 100% I agree. The next one is what's one book or podcast you recommend to everyone you meet?
Well, normally I would have said Lucky Man by Michael
Yeah.
J. Fox, but I can't use that because they're the same. I love a podcast that my friend does called Unreasonable.
Okay.
Her name is Amy Lee, and she is an astrologist and a human design expert, and she does really, really interesting podcasts. So, Unreasonable.
I'm definitely gonna check that one out.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
There's one I'm on it. It's awesome.
oh, I will listen to that too. I love like astrology and stuff. I don't know too much about human design, but I'm sure I'll know more after today.
Yeah, I hope
But
so.
yeah, it's so interesting to me. And then the last one is what's one thing you can't start your day without?
Oh, protein and healthy fats, man. I'm all about regulating metabolism and blood
Hmm.
sugar and insulin. So, and I have my own chickens. So I wake up and I have eggs right from my own
That's
chickens.
so
So
cool.
that's really exciting every morning.
Yeah. No, I love that. So, getting into more about you and who you are and what you do, growing up, did you always envision yourself working in this career path, being an entrepreneur, or did you have a different path in mind for yourself?
Oh no, I definitely knew this was me when I was 3 years old. Well, okay, I don't remember this because I was three, but the family story is instead of an imaginary friend, apparently I had an imaginary business, and I was obviously the CEO because, like, of course.
Yeah.
And we had the oldest living woolly mammoth. And I had like an assistant named Michelle, and I would get really, really mad at my mom who wouldn't take me to O'Hare Airport in Chicago
Oh
because I
my
was
God.
convinced I had business meetings in South
That's
America.
so funny.
Rage at her. So no, for whatever reason, I came out an entrepreneur.
No, I love that. And you brought up human design. For anyone who may not be familiar with that or wants to know a little bit more, how would you describe what human design is?
Human design is something that I never thought that I would get into. Like it's totally something that is off the beaten path of like peer-reviewed science and all that. But it's kind of a mashup of more Eastern sciences like I Ching and astrology and that sort of thing, and then also quantum mechanics and biology and it traditional Chinese medicine, and it all kind of like comes together into one system. So a lot of the time when I'm teaching human design to like other healing professionals or
Mhm.
something like that, they'll recognize components of it and it's super holistic. It's also the first piece that you learn about it is a birth chart, and it says that you have like this chart that is kind of fundamental to you. And so you're born with it and it's fixed. And I think that's really, really useful. Astrology is also really useful, but astrology is always changing around
Mhm.
us because it's not really about us. It's just
Yeah.
about how we are in the world. Whereas human design is like your personal chart or blueprint that stays fixed your whole life. So it's all about learning how to work with your specific elements rather than, and it works really well with astrology, but it's different than astrology in that it's different than working with outside elements.
Yeah. And how did you kind of fall upon this and start learning about it and then teaching it to others?
Oh, it's so funny because someone suggested I look into it and I did what everybody does. I Googled it. I
Yeah.
like found like whatever the chart generator that came up on Google, plugged it in, and it spat out something that just like didn't sound like me. And I was like, well, that was stupid. And for some reason in the back of my head, I was like, make sure you put your birth time in correctly. So I like refreshed it and was like, oh, I didn't switch AM to PM. But of course, I'm like, it's the same day. It's gonna
Yeah.
spit out the same chart. I'm like totally not gonna believe it. And then it spat out a chart that was totally different. And the description, I don't even remember where the description was generated from, but whoever it was that was interpreting charts, it was like exactly me. And I was like, whoa, that's super intense. So I got sucked into it. And later that same year, probably 8 months, I hired a human design mentor, actually Amy Lee, whose
Mhm.
podcast I already suggested, to teach me about it. And halfway through our one-on-one work together, I pulled my birth certificate out for something else and I realized I had the time wrong by an hour again, except this time it didn't change very much.
Mhm.
But I said, "Oh, it changed this specific element." And she goes, "That's weird. Like if you had that in that fashion, I would expect you to present like this, but you present like this." And I was like, "Oh, you described my internal experience, but like what I'm presenting to you obviously doesn't match my internal experience."
Mhm.
So it was like twice finding it or it finding me. I had this like confirmation bias interrupted of like, I have to believe this. There's no
Yeah.
way because it's just so accurate. So that's how I got into it. And then I started implementing it first for myself as I learned and studied, then with the company that I was scaling at the time.
Yeah.
I scaled so quickly utilizing these principles and it was so supportive. And then I started getting lots of other people being like, wait, what are you doing? Because you just scaled a business like 0 to 7 figures in like 2.5 years. What the heck is going on? And of course, human design wasn't like the whole thing,
Yeah.
but it was so useful that then I started teaching it because, I teach it not in like a purist sense of all I do is human design. I teach it with the intersection of I have a clinical license, so I'm a therapist and I'm an entrepreneur and I have this human design expertise. So I teach it as a combo of all of that. And so and
Yeah.
then it just took off because people are like, this is awesome. And I was like, yeah, it is pretty
No,
awesome.
yeah, it's so cool. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I'm know more about astrology than human
Yeah.
design, but I have been wanting to like learn more about it because all those things interest me and it's just so cool at the end of the day. But if someone's listening to this and
Mhm.
they want to try applying their human design to their businesses and scaling it, like you were saying, what kind of steps should they take first?
Oh, it's such a good question. So first, you obviously need your chart. And some charts, when you go on the internet, they'll just give you a chart that you're not going to know how to read. Like,
Mhm.
obviously. My website is one of the places that has some tips attached to it. So if you go to revhumandesign.com. Maybe you can throw it in the show notes or
Yeah.
something. If you go there and you generate your chart, you're going to see the first three things that'll come up on most charts is your personality type, your strategy, and your authority. Look really closely at what your strategy is and what your authority is, because your strategy is sort of how things are supposed to like show up in your life, and your authority is like how you're supposed to decide if it's for you.
Hmm.
So if it doesn't come in alignment with your strategy, you don't even have to consider it, which I really like because I'm busy. I want to know what I have to think
Yeah.
about and what I don't. And then if once it passes through that and you're like, yep, that came in alignment with my strategy, then you pass it through your authority. So when you pull up your chart, like on the Rev site, it'll give you a little blurb about your strategy and authority. That's the first thing to look at, because typically, especially for business owners who are like super burnt out, or they're just spinning their wheels and they're not getting anywhere, a lot of the time the opportunities that they're chasing and the approaches that they're chasing, whether it's like marketing or what kind of clients or even what kind of like services or product they're into, is not in alignment in some way, shape, or form with their strategy and authority. And if you can start to shift that, it'll help. And I can give an example if that
Yeah,
helps.
yeah, for sure.
So like my first company in my 20s on the outside looked successful. Like I was paying my bills, whatever. I was exhausted. I was getting super burnt out. I got really sick. I started having the like random brain hemorrhages,
Yeah.
like serious, crazy stuff. And I obviously, probably we live in a world, there's probably toxins, there's probably all
Yeah.
sorts of stuff. But a big part of that business and the relationship that I was in that turned into a marriage, that turned into a divorce, all of those things that happened, I was initiating. I was always in like an initiation mode. Like, I'm going to make it work. Like, I'd make a decision and be like, I'm strong enough. I can just like push through,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, like that, like girl boss mentality that's
Hmm.
not so cool. That's really
Yeah.
like, just like, I'm just going to like kill myself versus if you're in alignment with your strategy and authority, which my strategy is to be invited. And if I'm out there doing what I think girl bossing is, like if I'm like, I'm just gonna like go, 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 go and initiate and tell people what to do, I am smart enough. I got stuff done. It's not like it just like nothing happened, but it was toxic to me.
Yeah.
Whereas if I was in alignment with my strategy, which in future companies I got much better at that, of just for me, because I have to be invited, I have to be visible, I have to share what I'm learning, and then I have to let people invite me into their world. All of a sudden, invitations come and opportunities come that don't feel stressful and they don't
Yeah.
feel hard, even though they're still valuable. It's like I'm still working. I'm not saying you're going to just magically make
Yeah.
millions of dollars without working, but like you don't have to just be pushing all the time. Versus there's other people who have in their design that they're supposed to be initiating. In which case, what I was doing would have been fantastic for them, but for me, it got me really, really sick.
That's so interesting. I'm so curious now, like what mine is, because I
I
also
know,
have
I
my
want to
own
like
business.
download it right now.
Yeah, because I have my own business too, and I'm like, oh, like I wonder like what I should be doing.
Yeah.
But I love how you said that because a lot of people do assume like when you're a business owner, all you do is like you work 24/7 and like you like don't shut off and like that's the only way to succeed, which again, like for some people that might be the only way, but for myself too, at the beginning, that's all I was doing. I was working till like 1 in the morning, like
Oh my
tired every day,
gosh.
like
Girl,
stressed.
you were
And I was
so
like,
tired.
yeah, and I was like, oh, well, like I'm making money, so like it's fine. And then you reach a point where like you
Yeah.
burn out, and I'm like, okay, like I can't keep doing this because now I'm like 26, but at one point I can't like I'm gonna like literally die from like God knows what. Like, you
When
know what
we're
I mean?
done, you have to text me your design and I'll be like,
I
okay, this
will.
is what's up. No, I think that's exactly right. And we're so conditioned to think that there's only one way to succeed.
Hmm.
And there's so many ways, and relationships can be so helpful. For instance, my one of my companies, I have like a right hand, like love her. She's a superhero and she's a very different design than me.
Hmm.
She can go out there. She has, in my opinion, endless amounts of energy. She can like lay it all on the field, sleep, wake up, do it again. She doesn't need invitations. Like she walks into a room and it's like she's sparkling and people are just drawn to her because she has
Hmm.
this warm, sort of enveloping aura around
Yeah.
her. I'm super intense. And so if I come in and I don't have an invitation, people are like, we do not like her. And I'm cool with that. But because we work together, she can go out there and sparkle. And then when people sort of opt in and they're really excited, she can invite me in. And then I've saved all this energy because I'm not running around like exhausting
Yeah.
myself, trying to force myself into places. And she is satisfied at the end of the day because she got to go out and sparkle. So it's not like one is better than the other. It's just making sure that we're in alignment in our relationships, whether that's work or play, in a way that we're doing what is useful to the world instead of
Yeah.
making ourselves sick and staying up till 1 in the morning and being exhausted.
Yeah, no, 100%. So you spoke a little bit about this, but you have a business called Rev. Do you want to explain like the mission behind creating this and how did you come up with the name?
Oh man. Well, the name, I'm just so inspired by everything about like revolution. And I
Hmm.
think when I started thinking about all the words that start with Rev, I mean, you can go through it in your mind, but there's so much. And I think we're at sort of a crisis point in capitalism, in so many ways. There's
Yeah.
not even enough time for us to label them all. And in human design, actually, it's said that in 2027, which I feel like I never get to live through prophecies, but this one you get to live through it, hopefully. 2027 is supposed to be this big shift from really hyper individual stuff that produced what we're now in, this capitalist world, into more of a collective. And it's not supposed to be like a pretty shift, because of course the people who are benefiting are not going to just be like, here, take all our money,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not going to be like that. But the people who succeed are going to start shifting. And so when I think about that, and I think about that kind of revolution in our world where we move from sort of it's everyone for themselves, profits are at the center. There's like so many companies, their whole mission, they might have a mission statement, whatever, but their mission is to put money on the balance sheet. And
Yeah.
so they're never going to make decisions that benefit humans or the world as the starting point. And obviously, I create businesses that do have profit, but profit is a byproduct instead of profit being the starting point for every decision. So I would happily not have a ton of profit and give someone a bunch of time off to deal with an illness or
Hmm.
someone's death or something like that, because that's what the money is for. It's for us as a collective. And that like profit line item actually doesn't mean anything if you're not translating it into humans and into
Yeah.
the world and into positive change. So I named it Rev because I think we're all ready for this revolution. And I think, well, okay, maybe not all the boomers. I am ready for this. Most people, millennials, Gen Z, I think we're
Hmm.
very ready for this shift. And I wanted to take what I've learned from starting a bunch of businesses, also what I've learned as a clinical therapist, because I have that, and support people to build values-led businesses that can hopefully start to take more and more of the money. Because the problem is the bad guys have the money
Yeah.
and then they're doing bad things with that money. So if we can redirect that capital, we can do so much, so much. But Rev is all about the root cause because sometimes that is your business. Sometimes you're totally have done a lot of healing, you're ready to do a values-led business. But sometimes you're so sick from capitalism and all the toxins in this world that you got to start there
Hmm.
instead. And so that's why I brought everybody together, because maybe your first step is actually biohacking and supporting your adrenals because your hormones are fucked. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yes, you can.
Maybe you're totally screwed up because you're drinking too much and you're smoking too much weed, and you gotta get that under control before you're going to go out and follow your strategy and
Yeah.
authority. Or maybe you do have a good company, but your HR person only cares about like money and is operating in that old school mentality and not very human oriented. And you need a specialist that can come in and like hear you when you say, I get that it would be more profitable to do this, but this is my business. And my
Yeah.
business is a form of art and activism, not just a way to extract money from humans, which is what we were all like taught business was supposed to do.
Yeah.
So that's why I built it. And I do believe we're all kind of prepping for this major revolution in our relationship with money.
Yeah.
And I really want to be a part of that.
Yeah, I love that. So, with your business, how do you ensure that your approach to supporting other businesses is inclusive and reflective of like the diverse identities that you talk about?
Oh, that's such a good freaking question. You know, no one's
Like,
ever asked me that.
for real?
Yeah, for real. So my undergrad is actually in intersectional feminist theory. And so everything that I do is built upon that. I will say it is actually a really interesting challenge for someone of my identity to want to support other identities in a healthy way. So, like one of my right hands is Hispanic and she's presents very differently in the world. And we find, I'm just using her as an example because
Yeah.
I know she wouldn't mind, but we find that different people feel comfortable working with her. And I want to first and foremost honor that, like, I am a white girl. Not everybody is going to want to work with me, and that is 100% okay. And I would like to elevate everyone to find who they feel comfortable with.
Hmm.
And we're also about saying these are our intersectional identities. And if you look at like on the Rev website, just on our who we are page is our mission statement, which is all about honoring those intersectional identities and trying not to whitewash it all away because that's what capitalism has tried to do. And so like one of my really close, actually I have a lot of international clients and one of my really close clients on my highest level of mentorship
Hmm.
right now, she is an Arab woman in Bahrain, but she's Syrian. I do not understand what it's like to be a woman who was raised in a completely different culture where
Yeah.
she wasn't allowed to women couldn't drive where she's from until she was 30. And that is something that I will never understand. So
Hmm.
making sure that we're coming in and saying what's right for me is not necessarily right or safe for you,
Yeah.
that doesn't actually matter what my identity or your identity is. I have to ask that question because even if you look like me, I may not know something about the intersectional nature of your identity that should require me to step back and take pause. So that's the first part is just we enter not assuming that we know what is right,
Yeah.
or not assuming that we know that we come from the same place. And from there, I also really believe in redistributing capital. So as much as I'm trying to hire really great people and make sure that they are paid fairly and make sure that they are amplified in this world, I also want there to be as much flexibility in my budget to make donations. So an example is the company, so it's me, but like the
Yeah.
company just supported putting a giant billboard supporting reproductive rights
I saw
in
that.
oh, did you see that?
I
Yeah, we
saw the
just
post.
put that
Yeah.
up. And like that is really, I'm really proud of that because I live in an incredibly red area, like
Hmm.
very, very conservative. I live in Montana. Montana's constitution is incredibly progressive. People don't know that, but it's incredibly progressive. And they're trying to change that, but that's not who we are. And so
Hmm.
my logo, the Rev logo, is right up next to this. And I think we're taught over and over and over that business is neutral, that business is like, oh, it's just
Hmm.
about money or whatever. Fuck that. That's so not the case. Where the money is going is where the power is.
Yeah.
And so even if I wanted to be neutral, I come in with a certain face, a certain skin, a certain gender, a certain everything about me that I walk into a room has weight. And so by stamping Rev's logo on a billboard in rural Montana that says we are for reproductive rights makes the business, which is not neutral. There's no way it could be neutral, but it
Yeah.
really leans into the fact that it's not neutral. I think it's not about appealing to the widest range of people and like hoping that some of them hire you. I think it's about having a point of view and not being neutral, and the right people will hire you. Because
Yeah.
if you're not into the fact that I support reproductive freedom, like I actually don't really want to help you build a business because I don't really want the flow of capital going your direction. So
100%.
that's just it's in every decision we make.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. As someone, I also have my own business, and everyone I work with, I make sure that like we have the same like views and beliefs because at the end of the day, like I don't want to work with people who just we don't align and like that's okay. And again, like how you were saying, like sometimes people just think like business is just about money, like be neutral and everything, but I'm gonna stand up for what like I believe in and what I think. And even like on my Instagram, like I share like some political stuff. Like I'm Canadian, so like some of the stuff doesn't really apply to me, but like the reproductive rights and like the election coming up and everything like that, like I still share stuff because I'm like, I don't really care. Like,
Yeah.
even if I'm Canadian, I'm going to share what I think is right because even though I have a smaller audience, some people might not know everything or like whatever. So, yeah, people are always like, oh, like, don't share that. Like, don't bring politics into this. But at the end of the day, like,
You
I'm going to do
have
what I want to
to.
do. Yeah.
And I will say, like, just to be real, I have lost business and I have lost collaborations. I've also rejected business and
Mhm.
collaborations that would have been helpful to me. Like
Yeah.
there's tons of contractors that I've interviewed to like do a project or something like that. And then when I ask them explicit questions, we are not aligned in values.
Mhm.
And I have lost business in various forms, different companies, when I have spoken out. I think a really poignant example that a lot of people are wading through is those of us who have supported Palestinians' right to
Yes.
safety in this last, I mean, really the last 70 years, but definitely in the last 1 year. I have always been vocal and I've always been very progressive and in American terms, we'd say leftist. I don't know what you guys
Yeah.
say in Canada, but that has always been me. However, for whatever reason, when October 7th, 2023 happened, and to be honest, I gotta say, I was a little bit naive because I thought that my audience, which doesn't all exist online, like some of it is
Mm.
very much like I have in-person
Yeah.
collaborations as well. I kind of just made an assumption they were all gonna agree with me about the whole
Hmm.
like not murdering lots of people of any
Yeah.
any race because they were always cheering me on about all the other really progressive, well, I mean, I think just reasonable, but
Yeah.
labeled as progressive things. So I would post about trans rights and people would be like, "Oh
Yes.
my gosh, amazing." I'd post about abortion rights. "Oh my God, amazing." So I was naive enough that when October 7th occurred, I, of course, like feel for everybody who lost
Yeah.
someone on that day, but I immediately located it as like an act of revolution from people who have been oppressed for many, many years.
Yeah.
And I immediately said, the innocent people of Palestine are in even more danger right now because of what has happened. So I was at that point, my main company was occupied the mental health space. So I was like, we
Mhm.
are providers. We have to stand immediate ceasefire. Like at that moment, that was the language we were using.
Yeah.
I, my silly self was like, everybody's going to agree with me that's following me because like they've been following me for years. So like they've already weeded out if they're like, I just thought that. And I was so wrong. The level of hate that came towards me was not something that I had anticipated because I thought that the hate would have come for all the other things that I had already
Yeah.
been, quote unquote, radical about. So I think it's important to know that like if you're a business with a point of view, you are sometimes going to lose business because of that. And first, I lost a lot of business. And then I gained even more business in a totally new direction because it just shifted who was watching me. And I
Yeah.
think that's an important part of not being neutral is knowing that like the right people will find you, even if the wrong people self-select and trash talk you and take their business elsewhere, which they're welcome to do. That's a very
Exactly.
powerful form of protest. And I would rather be on the right side of history than
Yeah.
receive money from people who think that it's okay to kill children. So at the end of the day, that's where my line in the sand is. And so I think business not being neutral is the future, but I don't think it's how we're trained.
Yeah, 100%. So two things. One, I also posted like about Palestine and stuff when that happened, and I also got these big messages of people telling me that like I need to pick up a book and like educate
Mhm.
myself and like all these things. And some people are just really nasty. Like there's one way to go
Dude,
about it.
I'm Jewish. I would just like to state that for anyone listening because you can't see me. I'm Jewish. So I was like really locating myself.
Yeah, and I'm like,
Yeah.
there's ways to go about it. Like if you want me
Yeah.
to like read something or educate me, because obviously there's some things that I'm not educated on, and like
Yeah.
I don't think anyone is fully educated on anything.
Sure.
But there's ways to go about it. Like some people are just so rude and say the most disgusting
The
things that
hate
like
was
even
wild,
if I
is
was,
wild.
yeah, even if I was wrong, even though I don't think I
Mhm.
am, if I was wrong, you telling me like to fuck off and like some people like
Yeah.
literally tell people to kill themselves, like that's not going
Yep.
to make me want to go educate
No.
myself anymore. So there's ways to go about it. And then second, I'm like queer, so when I started posting more openly about that, because at first I was scared and I was like, oh, like people are not going to want to like whatever,
Hmm.
like some people are homophobic, blah blah blah. But then I was like,
Hmm.
why would I not post about my true
Yeah.
authentic self? And when I started doing that, the amount of like queer clients that I got was so cool and fun. And then I'm like, oh my God, like
Totally.
I didn't even notice that like me shying away from like showing that side of myself kind of like didn't turn on like a business part of it, because people who are
Totally.
queer like to work with other queer people as well because they feel like more safe and like recognized. So yeah,
Mhm.
be like yourself and like share whatever, because at the end of the day it's going to attract the people that you want to attract.
I mean, if someone looks at my whatever Instagram and is like, "Oh, she keeps talking about protecting people," and they don't, they're like, that's a turnoff. Like, thank you for self-selecting,
Yeah.
because I really actually don't want to spend a ton of time with someone who doesn't align with me on there are some basics. I love working with people that have all sorts of different lived
Yeah.
experiences, and I welcome that sort of intersectionality in my life. But I want someone who, like I just said, I have a lot of clients overseas. I want them to be able to come to my Instagram and feel safe.
Yeah.
And if they, for whatever reason, do not feel safe, including the Jewish people in my life, because I was raised in a Jewish community,
Mhm.
not a Hasidic community, but with a lot of Jewish people. I guess we just have disagreed because there are some really fundamental truths that I believe about humanity, and this is one of them.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying about how then people could see themselves in you, and so then they wanted to work with you. It's like finally a place that we feel safe, a place that we
Yeah.
feel seen. Of course, I want to work with her, versus if we do the old school business model of like, just sort of like, how can I appeal to the broadest amount of people? Like,
Mhm.
I go there and I look and I'm like, I don't know who you are. Am I safe with you? Like, are you going to teach me the things that I care to learn? Or are you just going to teach me, nuts and bolts that frankly,
Yeah.
I could Google and Chat GPT could teach me. Like, I want people who come with a point of view.
Yeah, and I think now with businesses, personality is like a big thing. Like I love like going on people's Instagrams and like and not just being like text and that's it. Like even on yours when I went on, like you could see your face, you see like personality and stuff. And I think that's really important in like
Well, and it's not just, I think we're seeing a shift. I've never been good at like a super curated Instagram because I'm like, look, my chicken's cute or my dog.
yeah.
Like, I don't, that's just, it's who I am. It's what I'm
Yeah.
looking at. And that's how I see the world. But I do really appreciate that some people have put a lot of time and energy into like their brand and looking really
Hmm.
beautiful. It feels like marketing.
Hmm.
And that's cool. And I really like to hire people who I'm like, whoa, like I see who they are and like we're
Yeah.
so aligned. To me, my Instagram is not like the prettiest, nor is it ever going to be the biggest, but it gets the job done because
Yeah.
people feel really connected to who I am before. They hear me on a podcast or something first, and then they go to Instagram, and instead of looking like super polished and like, oh my God, this person is untouchable and like, all influencery, whatever, they're like, oh, cool. Like, look at this is a real person I feel
Yeah.
comfortable calling.
Yeah. It's like all about like relatability and personality, I think.
Hmm. Also,
Yeah.
like, it's just boring if it's hyper curated. Like, I get that it
Hmm.
does look really pretty on like an Instagram grid or something like that, but it's boring. It's not my life.
Yeah, and like that's also the only time that someone will see like your full Instagram feed unless they go
Mhm.
like click on it when they're already
Totally.
following you is when they go to follow you and like that's it.
Yes.
After that,
The
it's like
very
all
first
about the
time.
content. Yeah. So if I'm
Hmm.
like on Instagram scrolling, I love watching like people literally like no makeup, whatever,
Yeah.
just doing
Yeah.
whatever they want.
Yeah.
And like versus a very curated thing. Again, like sometimes I do like the curated stuff,
Sure. It's
but
pretty.
it's like more relatable to me and like again, I can see myself in someone that's not polished and like curated all the time because that's not who I am as
You just made such a good point, though. Though you only really look at someone's full profile like the one time.
yeah.
Like that's really it. And really, did you decide to follow because it was like this beautiful black and white, everything was the same, or did you decide to follow because like the pinned posts were like really cool and like
Mhm.
you opened them? I don't know. It's really smart. You only see that once.
Yeah, you do. So you were talking about redirecting the flow of capital from those who do harm to those who heal. Can you explain a little bit more what that means and how you're kind of doing that or
I mean,
helping?
on like a bigger scale, if you
Hmm.
think about who's rich in the world, it is not the people who are doing good things. And
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but like as they get richer, they do less good things for the most part. Not everybody, but for the most part.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, okay, we want to see all this change, and we're all out here like that are activists and are trained as whether we're trained as helpers or we're artists or we're creatives, whatever. But then there's this like narrative where we're supposed to suffer for our craft, right? Like if you're an artist, you shouldn't expect to make a lot of money because you should just love the fact that you're an artist. If you're
Hmm.
a therapist or a nurse or, whatever, like what, you're in it for the money, so you don't really care about helping people. Like that's the narrative that we're
Yeah.
fed that I actually think is a really effective tool of capitalism because it means that we just sort of accept the fact that like, oh, if I want to do good in the world, I have to be poor, or I at least have to overfunction for what I'm being paid. So
Yeah.
maybe you're not poor, but maybe you're offering something beautiful to the world and you're getting kind of like just enough back.
Hmm.
And I think that is a tool of capitalism and like the rich to keep
Hmm.
us quiet because then you don't have people who have beautiful souls who have a lot to offer in this world. They're not asking for more money. They're not even thinking that they should make more money. They're ultimately burning out. And then
Yeah.
once they're burnt out, they're not contributing and they're just sort of thrown away and become another like cog in the wheel. And
Hmm.
so that feels really important to me to kind of find this line for helpers and artists and creatives and the people who are, I think, the beauty in this world and say like, okay, there are ways that you can have enough capital that you are taking care of yourself, that
Yeah.
you're taking care of the people that you love and the people that you care about, and that then you can contribute to the world. And I believe that if more people who have that as their center point have money, the money will do better things. So that's
Yeah.
kind of like the whole point to me. And it takes actually a lot of deconditioning because think about like who we're taught is supposed to be rich and who is supposed to be poor. Like nobody's thinking that like, the person who leads meditation is supposed to be rich, like that's just not how we look at the world. And I
Yeah.
don't just work with helping professionals. Like I've worked with people in the tech world, in the clinical world, in marketing, like all of these different places, but they're people who use their craft for good. And
Yeah.
so they don't work for whatever,
Yeah. No, I
BlackRock,
agree.
Google.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were speaking about in the beginning how like you're a therapist, a business owner. How do you kind of balance everything you have going on and also keep
Mm,
space for yourself? Because at the end of the day, whether you're a business owner or not, you need time to relax, do nothing with your business and do
mhm.
nothing like work wise and just chill. So how do you make sure that you implement that into your daily life or routine?
There's a few answers to that question. So, first of all, I have a clinical license as a therapist, and years ago, I worked really intense hardcore trauma
Hmm.
cases. I don't work actively as a clinical therapist while also doing this level of activism and entrepreneurship because I have to understand that I have only so much bandwidth. So
Yeah.
if I decided I wanted say a private practice full of really acute trauma and I was sitting with that as a therapist all day, every day, I would need to make a different type of space for myself to balance from that. Now, what I do now, I do sit with people and I do work with clients, and then I also grow teams that are my employees. And I need to have bandwidth for that. So
Hmm.
I'm always thinking about how I can create structure and also systems in my life that appeal to the way that I like to work. So for instance, and this I help people figure out through human design, which seems like how would you find that out from a birth chart? But you
Hmm.
totally can. So I work really well, and it's in my human design chart asynchronously, where I can like be walking and working, where I just like dip into one thing and dip into the other. There are other people, like the right hand person I mentioned earlier in this interview, she needs block scheduling. Like, girl has
Hmm.
to be on or off. That's not how I am. And so the two of us create our schedules in vastly different ways
Yeah.
in order to support ourselves. So if I'm taking a mentorship client on who I've decided, like, yep, they can go at my highest level of support, we're using technology. We're using things like Voxer or WhatsApp or, like things that like allow us to be together in a way that we're both living life. And then
Hmm.
we come together maybe on Zoom a couple times a month versus someone who's really into block scheduling. Their offers, for instance, might be cool, we meet 3 times a week for an hour. That might be their level of close touch. And that's a really like basic example, but building your business from a place of supporting your energy and how your energy thrives versus thinking that the offer comes first and then you figure out how to unplug and do self-care. Like you were talking about, like, I need time to not be in my business,
Yeah.
which is true, but you have to start with what is the way that I can engage with my business the most sustainably and not get burnt out in the
Yeah.
first place.
Yeah. No, 100% I agree. And the last question I have came from Instagram. So they
Oh, cool.
asked, what step could I take today to begin my journey of alignment and deconditioning in my personal life?
In the personal life. Well, I'm going to go right back to the very beginning to the strategy and an authority. I find that people are usually operating like mentally, they're
Hmm.
highly intellectually, like they're thinking through all of their like life
Yeah.
in this hyper analytical, like I have to figure it out. It's all verbal in their head. And that's a lot of us have that, and that produces anxiety and depression.
Hmm.
And honestly, it's like to me at the forefront of like why people use substances and all why we numb with screens and all of that is
Yeah.
because we're trying to like quiet all the stuff that's in our heads. And in human design, there's something called passenger consciousness, which is sort of like what we're going for, which is like getting decisions out of the mind and into the body. And in human design, the strategy and authority are actually very physical, visceral feelings. So you kind of know if it passes through your authority in a way that's not highly intellectual. And so you use your mind. We love our brains. We love that we can strategize and be
Yeah.
analytical and all of that stuff. But that has to happen after the decision is made. So we don't want to be using all of that to make decisions because then we're really anxious and nothing we
Hmm.
end up forcing things in a way that's not aligned with our authority. So to the person who asked that question, I would say the first thing I would do is get really comfortable understanding your strategy and authority and then practice as much as you can trying to get out of your mind and really tapping into that. And I can do they're all different, so I'd have to
Hmm.
know that person's strategy and
Yeah.
authority to give a direct example, but from there, if you find that you're always jumping back up into the intellectual space, my guess is a lot of your relationships in your personal life, whether it's with work or with other people, are probably going to feel not so great because they haven't been entered into from this place of alignment. So, strategy and authority, that's where I would start.
Yeah. I love that. Well, that's all I had for you today. So thank you so much
Thank
again
you.
for coming on. Before you leave, do you want to shout out any of your socials, where people can find you, where they can work with you?
Yeah, well, first things first is the free offering. Go to the Rev website. It's Rev, humandesign.com, and download your chart because I don't want that to be gate kept in any way. I don't want that to be
Hmm.
something you have to pay for. And I do give some tips with that. So start there. There's also a bunch of links for no cost 15-minute calls. Like I want to start with the free stuff. Like if
Yeah.
you want to just chat with me for 15 minutes or DM me on Instagram, like I actually have created my life, so I have space to help people who can't always
Yeah.
afford it. If you can afford it, that's dope. We can do deeper stuff, but just know that that's not the only way that you get access to this information.
Hmm.
My Instagram is just my name, alex.muffson, and then Rev Human Design. So I can't wait to meet everybody.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I loved your questions, and
Thank
very few
you.
people have asked me most of those questions before, which
Thank
is
you.
really
I
cool.
really try.
Yeah, no, you're dope. I love it.